Hi, everyone. Welcome to Cozy Corner Chronicles. My name is Julia,
And I'm Liz.
and we are back with our first chapter chat for A Little Life. So, just as a disclaimer, we lied to you guys. We're sorry. We did not read 10 chapters
Yeah, we are
because,
definitely just habitual liars at this point because we've lied every single episode that we have recorded so far.
yeah, so we apologize about that. We promise we're great people. Um, But instead of doing 10 chapters, because if you've opened the book by now, 10 chapters is literally a whole freaking 1,000 pages. Um, we're
Yeah.
actually only doing the first two chapters. So that doesn't
hmm
even finish part one. So it'll be easier for you guys to also follow along with us, talk about it, read all of that good stuff too.
Yeah, because originally we were like, oh, let's just do it in parts. No, ma'am. Too much. It's like we have to read a whole novel within the novel, and it's just not going to work for us.
Yeah. So here we are, first two chapters. Let's get into it. So, hey, Coda. Hey,
Guest
Coda, special guest.
appearance.
But let's get into it. So, I guess I have questions for you just off the bat. What are your
Yes.
first impressions, like starting out the first two chapters so far?
So I think it's getting the background knowledge. And, I already don't do well with long background knowledge stuff. And so it was giving me Heaven and Earth grocery store for a minute. And I was just like, oh no, it's going to be one of those books. But then it kind of like started to pick up a little bit when we were kind of dealing with like an identity crisis and just like, them figuring out just like who they are. And I get it because it's like, I don't know. It kind of like resonates a little bit, kind of like trying to figure out who you are and like what what is your purpose, I guess.
Yes. And I think compared to the Heaven and Earth grocery store, it's definitely a little easier of a read for me. Coda's just chilling. Coda's like, dude, what are you guys talking about?
I
Um,
know.
but I think it's definitely an easier read. I don't know what it is about it. I think it's because we know the purpose, I guess. So it makes
hmm
it a little easier to follow along. But I
I
will have to
definitely
agree
agree.
with you. It's definitely a lot of character development, getting to know the characters, because I'll be honest too, I was really confused, kind of sorting out,
Yes.
right?
And it was hard because it was like they it, she introduces them like kind of simultaneously. As
Mhm.
weird as that is, like it kind of like everybody's stories, I get it, like they all tie together, kind of like if we were to write a story about ourselves, like our stories would intertwine at some point, but their stories are intertwining the entire time. So I'm like, wait, who is this again, or wait, what is he doing, or why, where is his family? Like it was kind of hard for me to keep up with for a little bit. And I know we had mentioned that and joked about that in the beginning. You were like, I need to write down who was who because I was confused about who was who.
Right. And so for people who are not really reading the book but just listening for our chapter chats, so the author basically writes the story, and in the entire chapters, it's all four characters just kind of separated by those ellipses. So each time you finish one character's section, the next part is going to be about the next character. So
Mhm.
each chapter has everyone's viewpoint in something. So if that makes sense for the people who aren't really reading it but just listening, that's how it's
Mhm.
styled. And I think that's unique. I've never read a book like that. So,
Yeah. And it's definitely different. I think it it took a minute for me to kind of catch on to the like the pattern that you're kind of telling them about, and it made it a little bit challenging for me in the beginning because I was like, oh, I've never read a book like this. So it was just it was hard to get into the groove of it, but once I got into it, I was like, oh, okay, like I understand like the breaks, the page breaks and stuff. So,
yeah, I was exactly the same as you. So I guess going right into it character wise. So
mhm.
we already read in our Judge a Book by its cover what the description was about. So our
Mhm.
four main characters are Jude, Malcolm, Willem, and JB so far. I don't know if there's going to be more in the future, but those are going to be our four main characters. They were college roommates, all of that good stuff. So
Mhm.
we have Jude, which I think we said in the back of the book, everything is supposed to be centered around Jude, I guess.
Yeah, that's kind of
Right?
what I picked up as well.
Okay.
And everyone's stories somehow tie to Jude.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So Jude, I guess, will be our main star. He is a lawyer who is disabled, specifically something with his legs. I don't know if they ever tell you exactly what it is just yet, but
Mhm.
he has tremendous pain in his legs, and everyone in the friend group kind of knows about it. He deals with it in his own way. And I think Jude is definitely the most secretive and mysterious out of all four of them.
But Willem knows more than anybody else
Yes, they're like
about
besties.
about like what he's going through and stuff like that, because there was a point where Willem had experienced him going through one of like his super major hard episodes, and like he found Jude just all messed up. And yeah.
Right, exactly. So Willem, in this case, is an aspiring actor. He works as a server in a restaurant right now, and everyone in the restaurant is either like a current actor or like a retired actor, something like that.
Hmm.
But in this story, as of now, him and Jude live together, and he also has a brother who actually recently passed away in the book in chapter 2, named Hemming, who had cerebral palsy, and now Willem's parents are both dead as well. So already off the bat, there's a lot of death, a lot of sadness, just a
Yes.
lot of hard hitting stuff.
Hmm.
And so then there's Malcolm. Malcolm comes from a very rich family. He is half black, half white, and he is an architect, and he works for this like firm that his dad basically pushed him into, and he basically isn't happy, and he's kind of got daddy issues, honestly, because the entire
Yep.
time he's talking about how his sister is the one that they love. His dad always talks about his sister, blah 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 blah. And then last
Hmm.
but not least, we had JB. He identifies as someone who is I think a gay man, correct? And then he's also an aspiring artist, or he is currently an artist.
Hmm.
But his parents actually have a house, but because of something with their relationship, JB actually lives at his ex's loft with like three other people, and it's this whole thing. So those are our
Yep.
four main characters off the bat.
Yes. And so we open up chapter one with Jude and Willem actually trying to find an apartment to live at. And they end up finding one that they liked, or that was decent enough for them. And even the rental lady was like kind of confused, because she was like, it's two single men who are trying to find a studio. And he was like, they were like, oh, well, they're not together. Like, why are they? It was just like this whole thing. So they end up getting turned down because of their financial situation or whatever. And then they decide to meet up with JB and Malcolm. And I was like, I was kind of like giggling to myself, because, like, oh, yeah, they met at this pho place. And I was like, pho? I was like, oh, but then I remembered the author is Asian
Right.
American. So they end up meeting for food, and like Julia had mentioned earlier, since college, like they've been really just inseparable. Malcolm is currently living at home, and Jude at that moment was staying in their basement of Malcolm's house. And so they kind of just go in and explain how all of them are living at that moment, or where they're living, or who they're living with. And so we find out that JB is actually renting a loft from a college friend. And like you had mentioned, he's working as a receptionist at an art magazine place. And he plans to network enough with everybody to get his own like art and whatever out there, is what I picked up from that. And
Same.
then yes. And then he ends up remembering that he knows this colleague, or he knows this girl that he can introduce Willem and Jude to, that she has a place that was up for rent, because something with her mom. I believe her mom is
Yeah.
went to a home.
I think it was either the grandma or the mom, like, yeah,
Grandma.
something like that.
Yeah. And so they Jude can't go, but Willem ends up going to look at the apartment. He's like, "Yeah, we'll take it." And they like have it for super cheap or whatever like that. Um and you want to continue the rest of that chapter?
Yeah, and I think this is actually our first time kind of getting not necessarily a physical description of someone, but right off the bat when they meet this like little Asian girl, she's like, "Oh my God, Willem." So in the
Oh
novel,
yeah.
yeah, like in the novel, it basically alludes to the fact that Willem is super handsome.
Mhm.
So she's like, "Oh." I don't want to say starstruck, but yeah.
She
But
definitely was because she was like tripping over her words, couldn't even look him in the eye because she just thought he was so attractive. I was like, what does this man look like?
right. I know. I'm like, I kind of want, I wish that there were descriptions, but then again, I
Mm-hmm.
guess maybe it'll come later. Maybe there's a point. I don't know. I don't want to jump the gun because I'm going to say that and then like it's going
Right.
to ruin the whole image. But anyways, yeah, they get the apartment or whatever they want to talk about. But anyways, they decide to take it. So Jude and Willem are like, okay, this is as best it's gonna get. Let's take it.
Mm-hmm.
And then it kind of moves on into like JB having a moment of pity for Willem and Jude, who basically, unlike himself and Malcolm, they have no family. So of
Mm-hmm.
course, like I said before, Willem's parents had died, and they don't really talk about like Jude. Like Jude is definitely the most mysterious one, so we get the
Yep.
least information about him. So I think it kind of just all ties together. But anyway, JB's father jeez, sorry, father is a Haitian immigrant or Haitian. I'm so sorry guys. I'm so bad at pronouncing things. Um but he immigrated to New York and then died when he was 3, and now his mother is a second gen, and
Mm-hmm.
she's very like she JB and his mom have a very good relationship, and honestly, JB in general has a pretty good relationship with I guess his family, but I forget the reason why he actually leaves, because he
Yeah.
mentions that he has a pretty stable home life at one point.
I think it was just to be off on his own, is what I concluded from that. But I also am like, you can't really put a finger on it because there was just so much information within
Right.
these just two little chapters.
Right. And so his mom actually is pretty successful. Like, besides being supportive, she does become a principal of a Manhattan magnet school. So good for her.
Mm-hmm.
Props to her. And she and other female relatives basically helped raise him and all of that stuff. And then it kind of
Yep.
goes into Malcolm. So Malcolm has, of course, like I said, daddy issues. So
Yep.
he's got a different type of relationship with his parents than JB and his mom does. But of course, Malcolm's sister is always favored, and they make a comment that like Malcolm's family really likes Jude, and
Mm-hmm.
because Jude is a lawyer. But anyways, it
Mm-hmm.
makes it seem like the parents actually like Jude more than Malcolm himself. But with everything, whatever, Malcolm's still kind of unwilling to move out on his own. Like he knows that his parents kind of provide everything, and he would be kind of not, I don't want to say dumb, but it would be dumb of him not
It would be
to,
dumb. Yeah.
right? Like to basically, you have everything, why leave? But, anyways, on Jude and Willem's move in day, the apartment's building elevator is, of course, out of service, even
Mm-hmm.
though they had promised, like, hey, it'll work, it'll be fine. So, of
Yep.
course, they take so many flights of stairs up and down, moving everything. And, of course, remember, Jude is, disabled. He's got some chronic leg problems. And so, because of this, he ends up having like super, super bad leg pain in the middle of the night, but he's kind of suppressing it. Like, he doesn't want to show
Mm-hmm.
it. But with that being said, he basically prefers to deal with his pain in his own way. So, kind of the end of chapter 1 ends with him just, laying down, being alone. All his friends know to leave him alone while he tries to deal with the pain and let it surpass.
That part made me so sad because, like, I remember, kind of like in the beginning of the chapter when Willem was like, when they kind of found out this everything that was going on with Jude, they would ask him like, "What do you need? How can we help you?" Like all this stuff, and he was like, "Nothing, nothing, nothing. You can't do anything. It just has to pass on its own." And that made me so sad because I just feel like he's dealing with all of this pain alone, and like not even letting his friends like sit near him or like just be there with him while he is going through this. You know.
And I think, like, tagging along to that, something tells me that Jude's always just been by himself, and he's probably learned as a coping mechanism because he's never had anyone that that's what he has to do. Because I even
Mm-hmm.
remember in chapter 2 at one point when they described when Jude met someone's parents, or like I remember he was talking to someone, I think maybe it was JB or someone like that, or Malcolm, and he's like, "Oh, the only thing I have is like this backpack. Like everything I own is in this backpack." And then the
Mm-hmm.
parents were like, "What the heck? That's so sad." So Jude is definitely the most interesting character right now,
Mm-hmm.
only because we know enough about him from other people's point of views, but
Mm-hmm.
nothing really about him that's been described too much yet.
I definitely agree with you on that. I feel like we have the least information about him other than the fact that he has very chronic pain and he doesn't have like family or he's not in the best financial situation.
Right, and he's a lawyer, so that's what we know
Yep.
about him so far. So do you want to start talking to
Yes.
us about chapter 2?
Yes. I just want to preface this by saying, like, it was a little, I struggled a little bit getting through chapter two. I feel like there was a lot of, I don't want to say unnecessary, but I can't, I'm just as a lack for a better word, unnecessary details. Like, I feel like it was like explaining the color blue, right? She would be like, the blue is so pastel and so calming and it looks so smooth and soft. Like, that's how it felt to me.
Right.
But opening up this first section in chapter two, it really just focuses on JB as he's going to his art studio. And it talks about how he has a routine every single day. Like he takes the train, you know, he does X, Y, and Z. It's very, very methodical. He does it every, like, you know, all the time. So he's a painter and he struggled many, many, many years to find, I guess, his niche, right? And he more recently took to photography. And so he decides, like, he loves capturing pictures of his friends, just being super candid and then recreating the paintings. But then it basically breaks it down to where, like, he really only likes taking pictures of Jude.
Kind of. Yeah, I think what he meant by that is because Jude is the most secretive, he
It's
describes
just,
it
mhm,
as the fact that when he captures something of Jude, it's the most pure. So yeah, like Jude is his
mhm.
favorite subject, but he likes it's almost like he's scrapbooking in my mind, except with
Hmm.
paintings.
Yeah. And then I remember he was like, but Jude is the most self conscious.
Yes.
And so, like, he's like, don't worry, like, I'll always show you it. And then he's like, but ha ha ha, he, because I found some candid moments that I know you're not going to like, but I'm going to keep them anyway.
Right. And I think it was interesting because I agree with you that I kind of struggled with chapter 2, and I think it's just because there's so much description and so much to keep track of between each of
Hmm.
the characters that you're like, okay, I need to slow down so that I don't miss anything. So I think in chapter 2 as well, when they're talking about JB, at first they describe the loft as like his wealthy college room or wealthy college acquaintance who has now made it big in the art industry. But then
Hmm.
later in the chapter, like it tells you that that's actually like JB's ex. And they
Yeah.
describe the living situation to be super disgusting because there's no rooms. It's literally just a loft that four people share. And they can all see each other and they all have like this line that they divide as their rooms and stuff. I remember it
Hmm.
said that one of the people was she does like painting, I guess, or I don't know. It was they were all unique. It was like someone did photography, another one did like deconstruction of paintings and all that stuff. So it was a very, very in-depth description of living situation, what he does, his routine, his opinion,
Exactly.
stuff like that.
Yeah, and it was nice. I guess it was nice because you kind of get to see the nitty gritty of everything. But again, it was kind of so just drawn out. Like, I feel like I could have gotten that in a shorter amount of time, but I get it. Like, I understand the whole, pulling it together.
Right.
Um, and then our last section that we read was section two, which really just focuses on Willem. And he's working as a waiter at the moment and he's trying to become an actor. So we get more background on his family. Um, they they had, so his mom and his dad had kids before him, but both just they lost those two children. And so they ended up moving to Wyoming to become ranch hands. The first child died from leukemia, and then the second one died just in their sleep. And I was like, oh, was this like a SIDS kind of thing? But they didn't really go into, anything else about that. So it just died in his sleep. And then their third child was Hemming, which you talked about earlier. And Hemming has cerebral palsy, as you said. And Willem has such a deep love for Hemming. It literally made me cry inside. Like, he's like, no one else is going to care for Hemming, so I will, kind of thing. And so he Willem feels just really alone in the fact that he loves Hemming because his parents just don't, like, I don't want to say they don't give a fuck about Hemming, but that's what it seems like. And so basically they see Hemi not as a burden, but more as like a chore.
Mhm.
Like they have to take care of him because they have to, you know? And so Willem ends up going to college, and then Hemming is just like his health is deteriorating, ends up going on life support. It goes into the hospital, and then his mom calls him and just like not brushes it off, but it's like, oh, by the way, your brother's in the hospital. Like, no, it was just very, that was it. And and Willem was like, oh, okay, don't worry about it. Like, I'm gonna come home so that I can take care of him, whatever. She was like, oh, don't worry about it. He's gonna be fine. Anyways, Hemming ends up passing away, and then that really just sent Willem kind of like not in a spiral, but it made him really sad because obviously he cared so much about Hemming. And then that following year, his dad passes away from a heart attack, his mom passes away from a stroke. So it kind of just goes into how Willem like wasn't close to his mom or his dad, and even though he wasn't close, he was still mourning them. But it's just like it's just a lot of like he dealt with a lot of death. I mean, he has no family left. So I can't even imagine like what that would feel like.
Yeah, and I think it definitely alludes to the fact that Jude is probably gonna be like a brother, like a brother role
Hmm.
because of the fact that Jude is disabled technically, and they both don't have any family, and now they live together, and stuff like that. But I will say, I think something I actually really liked about Willem's section or the description is that he does kind of reflect on the fact that in the end he kind of understood where his parents and especially his mom was coming from when it felt very nonchalant about Hemming. Like I do like the fact that he reflected and was like, okay, I kind of get it now because if all my kids had died and then I found out that now my kid is disabled and they're probably not going to make it, and like he basically says, I
Not getting her
understand.
hopes up. Yeah.
Right, like they're like, I don't want to get attached, and then their one son that they you know have still alive is now successful, going to college, stuff like that. So I really like that because I felt like it showed that Willem wasn't necessarily bitter towards the end of when his parents
Hmm.
actually passed. I know during the section, obviously, there was bitterness. Like, why do you guys not care about Hemming? Blah, 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 blah. But in the end, when his parents died and stuff like that, he definitely had the resolve in himself to be mature and understand kind of where they were coming from.
Right. And then do you want to go into our third section?
Yes. So the third section then talks about Malcolm.
Hmm.
So, Malcolm, like I said, he works at an architecture firm, basically for two really pretentious, egotistical bosses. But his family is definitely the wealthiest in the group, like we had mentioned before. His mother is a successful writer, and his father is a successful financer. So, he's biracial. And so, a big thing I remember in the chapter that it was talking about was this, like, I don't want to say animosity, more like tension. I think that's a better word. Tension between Malcolm and JB because basically related to blackness. Because Malcolm's
Hmm.
biracial and JB is not, basically, JB kind of makes comments that he doesn't understand what it's like to be black because he's biracial. And
Hmm.
I think Malcolm really takes that to heart because I don't want to relate this to other races, but I feel like I've had friends who are biracial Asian wise too, and they kind of say the same thing. They're like, I'm not Asian enough to sit with the Asian kids, but I'm also not white enough to sit with the white kids. So
Yep.
I think it's kind of like that kind of vibe between JB and Malcolm.
Hmm.
So, Malcolm, meanwhile, thinks people who consider their race the core of their identity came across as somehow childish and faintly pathetic. Like, that's what Malcolm quotes in the book. That's page
Hmm.
62. And obviously, with that quote, you can see that he's like salty. Like, that's kind
Yeah.
of just what it is.
Hmm.
He's salty. But nevertheless, he internalizes these comments and then questions his own identity. And that's not even relating just to race at this point. A big thing about him is his sexuality.
Hmm.
Like, he goes into this whole entire monologue at the end of the section where he's like, "Oh, I dated this girl, and then she turned to be lesbian." And then he's like, "Yeah, I turned her lesbian, obviously." And then he's like, "And I guess if I were to classify myself, like I guess I would be gay because then he describes how one time Willem got very close to him and he's like, "Oh, I gotta go. Like we gotta have some space between us." So I think
Hmm.
Malcolm is the most confused in terms of his identity in the group for sure, in my opinion.
Yeah, definitely. I agree with you. And I feel like just kind of like wrapping up all the sections and everything that we've read so far, I feel like this friend group essentially internalizes a lot of things that we go through just as people, like
Hmm.
growing up and even just navigating through college and life after college. Like everybody kind of paints this picture like you go to college, you get your degree, and then you get a job. But that's not always the perfect picture that gets painted. Like there's gaps in between all of those things. No one tells you like you may not find a job right after college. You may not know what you're going to do for the next 2 years until you actually do find a job, and the degree that you got that now doesn't matter because the degree has no correlation to what you're even doing. Like I feel like every character you can resonate with at some point, just the experiences that they've gone through, or, you know, I feel like you can always find a character that is relatable thus far.
Right. I agree with that. And I think also we had talked about this, like the ages of everybody in this friend group, I think ranges from 27 to like 29 or something like that.
Hmm.
So for people like us who were in that age range, I think it resonates even more. And I agree with you, like it navigates life and telling you that after college you might not find a job and that's okay and that's normal. This really depicts the struggles, especially for people who want to go into entertainment and arts, right? Because they follow their dreams. They're all trying to be
Hmm.
artists, entertainment, actors, and that's a hard road. And this, I think, does a very good job of just depicting that right after college, the struggles of trying to make it big in media industry in New York where people are following their dreams.
Yeah, and I really enjoy that this is a male led story. I think we had mentioned this earlier. Like, everything that we've read so far has been very female based, and just the main characters are females. So it's really nice to see kind of like a switch. Because, like, how often do we think like a man, right? And how often do we get to know like the internalizing struggles of a man, or what they're going through, or what they face, even aside, like, even just, in terms of like sexuality or race, or like being biracial, like all of those things. Like, you don't, we don't, we've never experienced those things.
Hmm.
So it's nice, not nice, but it's interesting to see just a different take on like characters and just character world building and all of that.
I agree. And for anyone who is a male listening to our podcast, I wonder, because it's a female writing in male perspectives, I'm actually kind of
Hmm.
curious to hear if this is accurate because I feel like I remember reading something interesting where someone had said when like men try to write female perspectives, it's just not it.
Hmm.
So I'm curious to see if, because she's a female writing in men perspectives, if that is kind of the same sentiment. But I mean, I think it's interesting too. Everything so far, yes, it's a lot to digest, but once you get through it, I can see how you can kind of get attached to the characters.
Yeah, and just going back on your point, I didn't even think about that. So I'm wondering what inspired her to write from this point of view, or what, not research, but what, like, how did you come up with these thoughts and these ideas for these characters? Because she has never experienced that.
Hmm. I agree.
Yeah.
So I think just starting off, we've only read two chapters, but this is definitely going to be a long journey together. And I feel like I'm scared to read. Like,
Yeah.
because it's like we know by now because of TikTok that there's something that's going to happen that makes you cry, or there's something that's going to be sad. So, like, to me, I'm guessing it's going to be a death. Like, I'll call it right off the bat. It's probably going to be death of somebody, or I don't know. But
Hmm.
I don't know. I'm kind of scared to to read because I'm scared to like be upset.
And I'm like embracing myself for the emotional distress that this book is about to put me through. But I'm just hoping, well, I know it's, well, I feel like it's going to be worth the read.
Yes.
So I'm really excited to see what is going to come next. I feel like we have a pretty good and general idea of all of the characters now. So
Right.
I'm wondering where the story is going to take us now.
Me too. Because now that she set the baseline, I mean,
Hmm.
Whew, I'm nervous, I'll say, but I mean, I guess to kind of wrap it all up, we won't lie to you guys this time. We promise that we are going to read chapter
Yes.
3 and then chapter 4. So that will finish off the first part, which is the Lisbon. I'm not even sure how to pronounce these things. Basically, part 1 will be done, and then we're going to be starting part 2 in the book. So for those who are also reading it, just read chapter 3 and chapter 4, and we'll be in the same spot when we talk about the next chapter chat.
Wait, is that how the book is split up? Because I always get confused. Like, what part are we in now?
So if I said that wrong, then you guys can look at the book and tell me.
Look, not us lying again. Okay, no, no,
We
no. Sorry.
promise.
So we are going to read chapter 3, and then we'll read chapter 1 of part 2.
Yes. So, oh, is that how
Yeah.
it's okay? So, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So, basically, read the next two chapters, is what we're saying.
Yes. Read the next two things
Yes. And
because
so,
that could
for
be.
people who are tuning in who did not want to follow us along for A Little Life, for Lunar Love, like we had said, we're also simultaneously reading that. For that one, we will be reading the first four chapters
Mm-hmm.
and doing chapter chats on that. So, you guys have two options here,
Yes.
either A Little Life or Lunar Love, but either way, we will be talking about both of the books in very different manners, I'm sure.
Yeah, and I'm super excited to talk about Lunar Love because I know we're going to do some sub episodes just about you know about zodiacs, maybe even about Chinese culture, especially if it needs that extra details or anything like that. So I'm really excited for that one.
Yes, me too. So I guess that's all we have for the first two. I say that's all, and we still managed to talk for 30 minutes about two chapters of Little Life. So, oh man, this is about to be a real long and windy road. Um, but but with that being said, that's all we have for you guys today for chapter chats for A Little Life, and we hope that you guys will tune in with us next week or whenever we release the episode for our next chapter chats for A Little Life as well. Yay!
Yes. And side note, please go check out our TikTok because we have done some hilarious things on there that you guys would love. Also, there's some book hauls coming on there, and we are just so excited to show you guys what we got.
Yes, and I would just like to say, I think Liz and I are just like the funniest people in the whole wide world. You guys may not think that, but if you guys would just watch our TikToks, you would know that we are so funny. And when we're filming TikToks, we're just cracking up. So just think about us just laughing to death in the middle of the night, and that would be great. Thanks.
But anyways, thanks for tuning in this episode. We hope that you guys follow along. If you guys have any comments or anything, and especially our male listeners, if you have any input on this book, please, please, please let us know. We would love to hear what you guys have to say and what you guys think about the book.
Yes, alrighty. Thank you guys. Bye.
Bye.